Hello and welcome to Innovation Through Disruption and Challenging the Status Quo as a DevOps Leader. I'm your host today, Mike Vizard, and our presenters today are Steve Burton, CMO for Harness, and Dheeraj Khanna, Vice President of Engineering from Tenable. Gentlemen, welcome to our event. Today there are two housekeeping notes. One is we will be raffling off 4 Amazon gift cards, so people who stay to the end will be winners. And finally, there is a Q&A capability. I direct your attention to the various chat and questions buttons that you may see in front of you. And if something pops up that you're interested in, feel free to type it in and Steve will do his best to get to it as he can. And if not, we'll surely get to you after the event. Steve, take it from here.
Thanks, Mike. Welcome, everyone. Super excited to have an exec roundtable with Dheeraj from Tenable. And so a little bit about Dheeraj. Currently runs cloud engineering. Formerly, he worked at Workday, Sky High, and Oracle, running DevOps teams. So Dheeraj has a lot of experience in leading teams, leading transformations. And so I'm super excited to be able to walk you through a Q&A in the next 30 minutes. And Dheeraj is going to kind of walk you through his insights, how he's kind of become a DevOps leader, and more importantly, how he gets things done. So Dheeraj, welcome to the Q&A.
Good morning, Steve and Mike. Glad to be here. Let's get started.
Okay, so who is Turnable, Dheeraj? What do they do?
Yes, Turnable is a cyber security company. We are in the business of keeping the cyber exposure score for 20,000 plus customers of ours. We used to be, back in the day, classic Nessus on-prem agent-based product, which over the last 5-7 years has evolved into a cloud offering called as TIO. And as the threat landscape in the industries have changed, we have evolved our approach to how we deal with security. And Tenable is one of the leaders in this space, where we keep a threat landscape and keep a close watch on the cyber exposure score for our customers. And to our CISOs, we give them a proactive view of how their overall security posture is. Today, the landscape or the threat model of that security has changed over a period of time. It's not the classic data centers or your office which is at risk. It's your employee who's connected over a VPN from a Starbucks is exposed to a vulnerability today. So the landscape changed, as so have we changed the game of how we address security for our customers. So that's what Tenable does. It is in the business of vulnerability management, WAS, and overall making sure that the cyber exposure score for our customers is intact.
Great. So, Dheeraj, tell us about the leader. Like every leader has a background and a story. So what's your story? What's the kind of what makes Dheeraj get up every day?
So what drives me, Steve, is I've always been what I call as a tinkerer from my early days and as an individual contributor. So as a leader, the same habits evolved. I've always challenged what I call as status quo. I've also used a term called as transformative or disruptive leader, where I take these challenges as a head-on, rather than trying to escape that. So I face them head-on. So anytime I've gone to organizations, I've looked at areas where if the ops teams were running like a classic ops shop, so I've disrupted that, and I've tried to, by virtue of servant leadership, I've tried to, transform these status quos and ask myself this questions: why are we not doing certain things in a more programmatic, more automated way? What can I do as a leader to influence that change across the organization, just not in my world? So that's what I call myself as a, disruptive leader, and hence the word tinkerer.
And I know when we chatted, you mentioned bold being one of your principles, and just a risk taker, and being willing to drive change. Like, where did that come from? Is that something you learned over time? Was it something you just grew up with? Like, how did you become that personality type?
I think over a period of time, the one thing I realized, Steve, is that change is the only constant in the world. And one of the principles I learned early days is it is okay to try and fail, but it's not okay to fail to try. So I think that one single statement, I internalized that in my early days. And if you look at engineering in general, just not software engineering, the only way engineering has evolved in the entire history is experiments, research, defense. Out of the 1,000 experiments people do, one of them succeeds. And the only innovative companies that come out are the ones who are continuously trying and failing and then evolving. So so that's those principles I internalized early in the days, and that's what I advocate, I champion within my organizations to encourage people that we should be encouraging impetus. Failure should be taken as an impetus of change.
Got it. And if you look at the practices you mentioned briefly, like software engineering is always about change. What are the things you just stand by? So like the principles of being a DevOps leader, like what do you tell your teams and people like on their day-to-day activity? And I know culture is important in DevOps, but what's your principles?
The core principles that at DevOps, what I follow is, as I said, is that always challenge the current state. If you don't like things, the most important thing for a DevOps organization is that you must have a very clear understanding of what the business drivers for your organization are, and use technology to enable those business drivers. So that's the first and the foremost principles that as technology leaders, we must have a very clear laser focus on what the business drivers is, and technology should be able to enable those business drivers. Another one is always constantly be looking at sources of innovation. What will differentiate you or your company or your organization from your competition? In the world of DevOps, specifically, it will be concepts like moving from a mindset from being an ops shop to a DevOps shop. If you are a DevOps shop, then constantly innovating, moving from an infrastructure as a service to platform as a service, adopting principles like DevSecOps. So depends on every company which stage of maturity they are. I constantly look at innovation as the next step. The third area which I focus on is an area which is very, very important, is concepts called partnerships. So it's and classically, if you look at, there's always a healthy friction between engineering and DevOps, product management and DevOps, because you want to run slow, the other teams want to run fast. So there will always be a healthy friction between these organizations. So finding ways to look for partnerships within these organizations is the very important part. Making sure that while we are making a change, we are bringing all the teams along in a more collaborative, consensus and cooperative way. It's a very important element. And I also call that the fourth element, which I call as you have to understand the business motivation, not just your organizational motivation, and it should be more intrinsic rather than extrinsic. So and always, the last thing which I would focus is having a term what I call as skeptical curiosity. So always listen and learn and take risks from your team members, because a lot of that insight, actually, you're harnessing the intelligence of all of your team members. Most of my ideas are actually coming from asking the right questions to an architect or a DBA or an SRE. And a lot of times, if you have these unfiltered conversations, people will give you a lot of insights about what is working and what is not working well.
Got it. And Impact is something we all talk about. It's what I tell my team: make sure you have an impact. And I typically say measure what you do. Like, you don't want to be working on things that are not relevant or having a business impact. How do you see that as a DevOps leader? How do you measure impact? How do you drive the mindset of impact?
So specifically in the world of DevOps, in the end, the most important impact is by having a very clear reflection of what your key performance indicators are. And in simplistic way, I can be an SRE, I can be looking at the most complicated Kafka dashboard or an Elasticsearch dashboard, which is all good, but that's a language and format which an SRE understands, a developer understands. I asked them the same question, that if your CEO comes and walks by the dashboard and you have a very complicated facade or some JMX error that you're looking at, will you be able to characterize and explain that in less than 30 seconds to your CEO? And if the answer is no, and I have to actually go and spin a whole story around that, that's a problem. So the biggest pitch I give to everyone in DevOps in terms of impact is that you should have an elevator pitch of what is the state or pulse or health of your entire platform. Are your services working? And that's what I call it key KPIs. So in our world, yeah, we have products like vulnerability management, WAS. So I should be able to go and tell my CEO that this is the state of my product called as VM or WAS, number of scans, number of pending scans, number of aborted scans. So I should be able to characterize that in less than 30 seconds, what I call it as and that's what impact means for a DevOps to the rest of the organization, that it should be so clear, so distinct, so crystal clear, so that anyone looking at that screen or that dashboard should say, yes, my service is healthy or it's not healthy. So as a leader, I think that's a very important thing I advocate and even evangelize with my team, is make sure that the key KPIs, and firstly finding those KPIs. In our world, KPIs are pretty simple. You basically are doing heuristics, you're doing trend analysis, you are creating alerting and monitoring, you are creating services for your clusters and making sure that there are self-healing capabilities. You are making sure that you have governance and security. Those are some of the KPIs in our world which are very impactful, but translating them into language and format which the rest of the organization can understand is the secret sauce.
Got it. And business context and lens, I guess, is the everything, right? If you can't put it in the context of the business, it's very difficult to understand the impact you have on the business. And where do you think most leaders go wrong? So I know we talked a lot before this about kind of like some leaders try and play it too safe. What do you think the big mistakes DevOps leaders make?
I think the area where leaders usually go wrong is, as you mentioned rightly, is that inability to take risk. I think the concept is, and that's, if you are seeing an inefficiency or a suboptimal design or a state of technology stack which is not working, so, confronting and facing that challenge head on is the only way out. And most of the time, I've made that mistake a lot of times where I've waited too long, and that issue has bitten us in the back because we waited long. It can be a technology stack, it can be a process, it can be a skill set in a team where if you see a problem, and I call that a pinch crunch theory, that if a shoe pinches, take care of it right away before it becomes unusable. So so I think that's where I think the leaders, if they take too much time acting and confronting a problem, it just makes that problem bigger, and that the blast radius keeps increasing. So that would be my, an area where I would probably advise all the leaders that if you see a problem, confront it and act on it sooner than later.
Got it. And I'm going to skip ahead a little bit. I think one interesting kind of debate about leadership is it art or is it science? So there's lots of leaders that are very creative, very inspiring, very visionary. There's lots of leaders that are data driven and very metric orientated. What do you think makes the best DevOps leader?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think in general, not specifically for a DevOps, I think leadership evolves as art over science, because there are no mathematical formulas, there are no algorithms to address issues like, I focus on EQ over IQ. So there's no rocket science, or there's no calculated algorithm where you can say that I'm going to solve this EQ problem of an individual or a team by applying these principles. There's one side, every team has a different unique blend individuals, so one size does not fit all. So you always have to be very mindful of a concept called as EQ. And some of the principles that I follow for myself are, always lead with compliment. You have to understand what are the employee reasons, like in case of burnout. You have to make sure that there are staff buy-ins before you make decisions. Most of your decision making should be an endoskeleton approach style, where you are harnessing, as I said, the intelligence of all your team members before taking a decision as much as possible. It's still not a democracy. In the end, you still take decisions which might not be in agreement with the team, but as much as possible, try to have devolved and inclusive decision making where most of the team members are agreeing on that decision. You have to understand the EQ aspects, where when team members are pushing back, what could be the reasons for it? Is there too much work? Is there too much of busybody work? Are the goals unclear for the team members? Are we creating an environment where there's a fear of failure, and the leaders are following concepts like control and decimation as opposed to encouraging failure? So those are some of the leadership skills, either good or poor leadership skill that you spot as instances and work with your leaders to mentor them to grow into that model, and making sure that you have planned your work, and then you're working on that plan. And so these are some of the principles I follow, that EQ is very important in that area.
And so you mentioned that you seek the intelligence of the teams and the people who work for you before you kind of arrive at a decision. One thing that always struck me in the last 10 years with DevOps is, as an industry, we're never short of ideas. And I mean, I have a brainstorming call on my team every week, and we spend an hour brainstorming ideas to try and come up with new ways of doing things. How do you create a forum where you can take ideas, and more importantly, how do you sell the ideas to not just the teams who come up with, or the people who come up with ideas, but how do you sell your ideas to drive a change across the organization? And I think this is one of the big challenges, probably the biggest I've seen in customers, is just getting change done is hard. So how do you do it?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, and again, coming back to it, it's more art than science. There are no calculated formulas around this. The most important thing I focus, Steve, here is making sure the orchestration and the characterization of the message when you're selling an idea is very important. And again, the business drivers is what comes into play in that case, where your idea is only as good as the adoption of the idea is. And for that, you have to make sure that you're selling the idea in language and format to various teams. An example is, like, if I want to actually move from, let's just take it as a hypothetical, like from an Elasticsearch to a managed Elasticsearch, or from ops to DevOps. So change is always hard. Change always comes with resistance, because you are disrupting something from a normal course of a day for some individual, for a team. So it is always hard before it becomes easy. And the first and the foremost principle or the step is to make sure that you are you're selling that idea and getting an adoption. So you need to be a champion. You need to evangelize that idea. You need to be a product manager in that area. That why is this initiative important? What will it do to your organization? What will it do to your entire, to your team? And what if it succeeds? What are the outcomes that one should expect out of it? And the simple terms like what's in it for me needs to be explained to a product manager, to a software developer, to a DevOps engineer, to a CEO. And as a leader, it becomes your job to play that role. That where in each organization, you have to actually show the value proposition of that idea. Why is it important, and what will it bring to the entire company, to that team? And that's extremely critical. And what I call is orchestration of that message is very important. And it requires careful planning. It requires careful crafting of the message. And to an extent, it also requires a little bit of selling. I think that's what it comes down to.
Okay. And now if we kind of move from the theory of DevOps leadership to some real world examples, what's been the big wins for you as a DevOps leader? If you kind of look back, what are you most proud of? And maybe you can talk about how difficult it was or how undifficult it was. But let's give the audience some kind of real world examples.
Yeah, I think I've been very humbled in a lot of organizations at Workday, Google, Oracle, and even at Tenable. So I'll start with the most recent one at Turnable. The big wins are like the most important thing is that recognizing if you need to staff the organizations, because today our company is in a hyper growth mode. We are growing across all dimensions, product wise, very fast. So as a leader, one of the first early things I had to realize was that our teams are very understaffed. So making sure that I pay a lot of attention into staffing as a top priority for our. So I think we are almost in the last 12 months, we've grown our team by 40%. So because from day one, I just realized that this is a very important element for us, that if we do not grow the team, the last thing any executive, either it's a salesperson or a CEO or a CFO, the last thing that anyone wants to hear from a DevOps leader is imagine like a sales guy lands a $1 million ARR deal, and the DevOps leader says, sorry, I cannot serve this business because I don't have capacity, either from resourcing or from infrastructure. That's the last thing. That's a recipe of death for any fast-growing company. So as a leader, you need to make sure that you're always 2 steps ahead of the business in terms of readiness. Very critical point. And so staffing becomes a very important function. Okay. The second thing, I think we've been lucky where, and again, but I was also very lucky that the team I inherited or built were extremely collaborative, open-minded leaders, individuals. So making sure that we are doing a mindset shift. This is one of the hardest part, is that imagine like an organization which is running for 5 years, 10 years in an ops-centric model, and you come as a leader and say, this is all wrong. We want to make a change around this. Let's go and do CI/CD and pipelines. And so in the first place, so getting that mindset shift can be an uphill battle. So fortunately, I did not have too many problems in that area because, as I've mentioned, that I had a really open-minded and across the entire organization, that we are a very progressive team across entire Tenable. So that mindset shift was not as hard, but in previous roles, I've had to have that. It can be a monumental task. So, but it is important to have that mindset shift. So, and then building a culture within your organization, building a culture across the entire organization, and making, as I said, you're evangelizing very strong partnerships, that it's not an us versus them model across engineering, product, InfoSec, and SREs. So you're building a culture that you're it's a one team. We call that one Tenable. So you are, as a leader, you are constantly building that culture where there's a collective gain for the entire organization, not just for your own team. So those are some of the wins that I've been able to drive. And there are more tactical wins where, like, of course, like all of the DevOps leaders, they are focused on key principles, uptime, reliability, manageability. So those are the very tactical day-to-day tasks that look at the state today. If you're getting a D or an F in these areas, you say that next quarter from an F I'll become a D, and from a D I'll get a B. So so you drive projects and initiatives in making sure your uptime is better, your reliability is better. And last not but the least, the most important thing, one of the key functions which get very easily overlooked. Conventionally, if you look at DevOps leaders, you are, perceived as a cost center. You're purchasing lots of servers and software tools. As a DevOps leader lately, I think that world is shifting a little bit. You're also drivers and you're influencing COGS savings. You're looking at your AWS or Azure or GCP bills and say that I don't really need to have petabytes of storage, or I'm running instances, or I'm running certain infrastructures which are idling. So you're creating programs, Lambda functions, or anything which is automated where you are actually containing your cost. And that's a win which most of the DevOps leaders actually are evolving, where they can go to CFO and say that, look, I found certain areas where we optimized our builds, and we can either redirect that money in various scale out options. So that area or that function has lately evolved in the 3 to 5 years, and fortunately we've been very lucky in that area.
Got it. And interesting as well, instead of just spending money, you can actually go back and say we save money, which when I was a developer would never happen. We just spend it. So two areas you mentioned was, one is sometimes going from operations to a DevOps model. But if you've been an established DevOps model or a team for a while, making that transition to software engineering. So, like, walk us through that transformation. Does it scare the DevOps team? Do they want to do that? Like, how do you see it?
Yeah, so I think over a period of time, if you look at a decade back, there was no I remember I was at Google and SRE was just evolving in 2004, 2005 timeframe. DevOps itself was a new term at that time, because classically you used to have like an ops engineer whose skill set was primarily Linux, POSIX-based system engineering, or you would have a network engineer who's designing the biggest, baddest BGP configurations on a switch. So that was the definition of an ops person. And then there would be an evolution from an ops that people would start writing scripts, in Bash and Perl at that time. And then it's like, oh wow, let's look at Python. And then people started rolling into Python as a programming language. So over a period of time, because the industry has evolved, because now the scale of that infrastructure has become probably 100x what used to be 15 years back. You cannot manage 10,000 or 100,000 servers, depends on how big your infrastructure is, by doing things manually. So the only way out was find ways to programmatically, make these changes across large-scale platforms, and thus. The easiest and the most convenient or the most optimal answer was write code rather than go and create for loops or create like multiple set sessions and make changes manually. And that's how software engineering evolved. So now today, if you look at a DevOps SRE skill set, we hire engineers with software engineering backgrounds. Because everything that we do is infrastructure as a code. So there's, if I have to add like a web tier or I have to add like 5 Nginx hosts, I'm not going to, write Ansible scripts. We are actually creating projects in Jenkins. We are pushing those through Harness, and it's like an orchestration framework or a pipeline. With the press of a button, we actually build these boxes. And behind the scene, there's a lot of software written. We use Helm, we use Terraform, we use, as I said, Harness. And it's done in a way that it's mostly, if you look at all our infrastructure, it's software code written. So that's how I am evolving teams, that we are looking at talent, which is software engineering, or if we have talent which is ops-centric, we are mentoring those individuals to become programmers in some form or shape.
And one thing you just mentioned there was making a transition from, instead of writing Ansible scripts to leveraging Jenkins and Harness. Like, why that transformation? Like, I think if you speak to a lot of DevOps people, it's like, well, CI/CD has been solved. We already have it solved. Like, why did you make that change or that disruption or that transformation?
I think there are multiple reasons for it. I think if we had not done that, so if I have anywhere from 500 plus servers, the other option is I do all these changes manually, and that's a very very intensive, human intensive operation if I were to do like all these configs. And so that was the reason, that as the scale increases, I have to, and the second part is that it's also very human error driven. So I have 5 or 10 or 20 environments I've configured. There's a configuration drift in all these environments if I were not doing it programmatically. The third thing is that I make all my environments consistent. So with Harness, I can just start pushing a button where I can say my dev, my QA, my integration, my regression, my staging, my sandbox, my production. While I push code, there is consistency of how that code graduates from a dev branch to a production, and I can see the drift. There is anomaly detection in all these tools, where I can easily see that my logs will start seeing more 500s or 502s, and I can easily roll back code. So that's why these tools are very useful for us, where in Harness or in Jenkins, I can easily see failure mechanisms and abort a deploy. So that's why these automated ways help you catch problems and fail fast sooner.
Got it. And so just to summarize, if you look back at the last 10 years, what advice would you give to people who are about to take a leadership position in DevOps, or maybe you're just running a DevOps team and want to drive change? What are the top 2 or 3 things of advice you'd give to those people?
I think one of the biggest advice, as I said, is which we started with, was constantly challenge status quo, be a disruptive leader, and be a transformative leader, and do it in such a form and shape where you are driving the rest of your organization, you're driving the rest of the team with it. You don't want to be a maverick leader, you want to be a servant leader. And by that, what I mean is that you want to make sure that all these changes are hard. So you are winning your rallying minds and hearts of your team members, so that the adoption of that change is welcomed. And it's not like it's not a top-down approach. It's more like a bottoms-up approach, where the adoption and the acceptance of this change is coming from the team more than it's being directed to the team. That's a very important advice. And the best part is that when the teams adopt this, they will actually be partners. They will give you ideas which are 10x better than what you would have come on your own. So it's a very important advice, where you're driving change, but at the same time, you're bringing your teams along with that. And you're, again, harnessing the intelligence of the teams to do that.
Yeah, that's definitely, partnering, I think, and selling are 2 things that sometimes don't go together. But I think when you partner first, then you sell your ideas and you get everyone on board, change is a lot easier. I think one of the key takeaways that I learned in this call was, no matter what change you want to implement or idea, it's going to impact someone or some team to change the way they do things. And how you get those people on board, or they understand the why behind your ideas and the change and how they benefit from it, is probably a good way of making those people feel comfortable, or at least accepting change as opposed to just saying no. So Dheeraj, thanks for that insight. If any of you've got questions, feel free to ask questions. I think we've got time for 1 or 2 questions, and then yeah, we can send you on the rest of your day.
All right, well, let me ask you a question, if you don't mind, and I'll jump in here. But Dheeraj, I'm curious, one of the things that I've seen over time is a lot of people feel like once they get the system up and running, they're kind of done. They met the service level agreement and they don't go beyond that. Do you think that DevOps is pushing people to be more involved in the businesses that they're in? And is that part of this whole conversation about being a leader, is not just to be IT centric, but to understand the business you're in?
Absolutely. And great question, Mike. And you're absolutely right. And this is something, as a leader, as an individual, it becomes everyone's responsibility, where you, DevOps as an organization, are change agents for the business. So you are business enablers. You are driving. You're not just becoming a cost centers. You are also becoming opportunity centers, where you actually can drive initiatives which can bring opportunities, like which can either have a faster way of shipping a feature, time to market for initiatives for your company can become faster by virtue of more efficient, faster DevOps practices. Like, think about this, like 20 years back, if a company wanted to build 5,000 servers, what would they do? They'll go buy a data center, or scale out their existing data center, hire 20 engineers, spend $20 million, and then go and tell their executives that, yeah, I will build these 5,000 servers, but it'll take me 4 weeks or 3 months, depends on what stage of maturity they are. But today, the same 5,000 servers in any cloud service can be done in less than like 1 day. You press a button, automatically it gets done. And you can go to your execs that, look, I can give you this in 24 hours or 48 hours of time, instead of waiting for 3 months or 4 weeks. So would your sales guy or your CEO or your execs, would they not love that kind of speed? And your time to market, you can be differentiators, you can have a separate marketing advantage, you can be the first to ship products against your competition. So this is what I called as DevOps can be that change agent, where what used to take 3 months, you can actually ship that in 1 day time. So that's the biggest value add I see as a DevOps organization, where you can influence or impact business positively.
All right, Steve, closing thought?
Yeah, I think closing thought for me is it's about, I mean, it sounds obvious, it's about people and winning the hearts and minds. And it doesn't matter how smart you are or how IQ you are. I think the emotional intelligence and getting across people to be on board with ideas and change is really how you get things done. So I know kind of Dheeraj made a comment, it's not really about DevOps leadership, it's more about leadership in general. So I think, yeah, being empathetic, like listening, just simple basic skills is often the way how you get things done.
All right, DevOps, it's not just a philosophy, it's an attitude. All right, our winners for the gift cards today are Elizabeth A., Jason C., Sue M., and Will P. I want to thank our panelists for sharing their expertise today, and I want to thank you all for listening, and have a great day and an awesome DevOps adventure.
Thank you so much for having me, Mike and Steve. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.